My name's Brandon and this is Video Game History, a show where I take a look back at a certain franchise of video games and retrospectively review them. For the first time ever, Samurai Jack receives its very own video game. Samurai Jack is only the third Cartoon Network franchise to receive a video game, as they milked the shit out of Dexter's Lab and the Powerpuff Girls. Hopefully it's able to reach loftier heights than those games did. Samurai Jack the Amulet of Time was released on March 25, 2003 for the Game Boy Advance, and was developed by Virtuecraft Studios and published by BAM. If you watched my previous videos, Virtuecraft Studios should ring a bell, as they developed Dexter's Laboratory Disaster Strikes as well as Chess Challenge. Both of those entries were horrendous, so this doesn't bode well for Amulet of Time. However, the game does seem to have performed quite well critically. Well, it did quite well in terms of Cartoon Network games. Amulet of Time sits at a positive 63 on Metacritic, receiving only a single negative review. The negative review seems completely unreliable too, as the little snippet on Metacritic calls it neck and neck with E.T. on the Atari. That's complete bullshit. Similarly, it sits on a 64.55% on game rankings. It appears that Samurai Jack the Amulet of Time is actually a solid game, so let's go see for ourselves. Amulet of Time is a side-scrolling hack and slash designed in the style of a Metroidvania game. The first thing you'll notice about this game is that it's actually pretty great in the graphics department. From start to finish, you're treated to loads of great pixel art, whether it be the levels themselves or the little cutscene type snippets. This is arguably the best looking Cartoon Network game to date that I've reviewed, and Virtuecraft really get to flex their muscles here as there's a pretty wide variety of locations. From villages to caves to snowy settings in Neo Tokyo, there are so many different locales on display and they're all really well done. The story driving you to go out and explore these different areas is the quest to find 4 jewels missing from the Amulet of Time, an artifact which Jack believes will allow him to return to his own time. But while the graphics are great, Amulet of Time is a massive disappointment in the gameplay department. Almost everything about how this game controls is poor and the exact opposite of what you'd expect from a Samurai Jack game. All of your movements are so clunky here and you'll quickly become extremely frustrated. The first issue you encounter is the controls for running. This seems like a pretty basic thing to get right, yet Virtuecraft somehow managed to mess it up. Usually in a game like this, just holding down left or right would see your character sprinting along. However, here holding down left or right will see Jack move along at a snail's pace. To sprint, you must first hold down left or right, then tap a second time, which will allow Jack to move with speed. This is such a clunky setup, and a lot of the time it actually doesn't work properly. Even if you've watched just one episode of the show, you'll know that Jack is nimble and able to strike with precision, so having Jack's movements be so janky here is off-putting. Similarly, the combat is fundamentally poor. The problems here stem from Jack being unable to move and attack at the same time. The only time Jack can swing his sword without standing completely still is if you jump and then attack. This decision makes combat very stilted and cumbersome, the opposite of what you'd want from Jack. All of your enemy encounters will consist of you walking up to the enemy, stopping, then mashing the attack button until they die. The clunky movement and combat combines to make the game's boss battles far worse than they really should be. These battles all seemed pretty well thought out, however being so restricted in your movements makes them a chore. It's like the bosses were designed to be fought by someone who can move and attack quickly, but those responsible for the movement didn't get the memo. You're unable to adequately dodge these attacks, so I had to resort to basically cheating against each boss. Each fight would usually involve me standing to the very edge of the stage and attacking from a position where I could reach the boss, but they couldn't reach me. It felt wrong, but the game forced me to take up these tactics. On a much minor note, the game defaults to having A be the attack button and B be the jump button. This felt extremely awkward to me, but luckily the game allows you to customize the control layout, which makes this a non-issue. The final thing I want to mention about the gameplay and controls is that Jack has a whole bunch of offensive and defensive stats from all different elements. The only issue I have with this is that I had no idea if they actually mattered or not. I'd come across items that would boost your stats, and you'll find equipment and armor that will boost your stats as well, but I never felt like I was getting stronger or weaker with these changes I'd make. It honestly to me felt like this was included just to make everything seem deeper than it actually is. While I'm being mostly negative about the game, Samurai Jack the Amulet of Time is mostly a bearable experience. Unfortunately, the wheels completely fall off in the final stretch of the game. You find yourself heading to Neo Tokyo, which means you know the showdown with Aku is coming. Here, Virtuecraft completely botches the lead up to the big crescendo. Firstly, there's a frustrating platforming section. The clunky controls again come into play here and make this way harder than it needs to be. The second, and biggest mistake, is that the game gives you armor which makes you invincible. Weirdly, the game doesn't make a big deal about this or anything. You just randomly pick it up, pop it on, and all of a sudden you're invincible. Because the game doesn't tell you you're now invincible, I didn't pick up on it for the next 5 to 10 minutes, until I came to a particularly tricky part and realised my health wasn't being affected at all. Once I realised this, I was able to just sprint past every enemy, get to Aku, and defeat him in no time at all. I am baffled as to why they would do this. With the amount of enemies sent at you in the final area and the way the Aku boss battle is set up, it's clearly meant to be a challenge, so why on earth would you give the player an item that makes this the easiest part of the game? Everything is out of whack here, and it makes Aku look like a pushover. From start to finish, Amulet of Time is about 2 to 3 hours long, but it doesn't feel like it's too short.
It has been many years since that fateful day. Aku returned to take over the world.
I will not fail you, Father! Samurai Jack, I must return to my own time. Tonight, at 7.
Samurai Jack the Amulet of Time is wasted potential. The graphics are great, and there's definitely a good game buried in here. That great game never gets a chance to shine though, thanks to clunky movement and combat severely hampering your enjoyment. Virtuecraft's botched job of the final portion of the game is spectacular, and almost renders the whole lead up to it pointless. I feel like the reviews went very easy on this game, as they didn't seem bothered by many of the serious flaws. Like seriously, how can you give this game a 6 or higher when fundamentally it doesn't play all that well? Oh well, hopefully the console iteration of Samurai Jack is able to top this.